Auto Eco? Is it as bad as you think, or are there some cases where it can really shine? Let's dive in. This is Console Empires. The community's been largely skeptical of the new villager priority system. Prior to release, some expressed concern that auto everything would break the game, or that there's just no way to make an RTS viable or fun for controller players. Would the console release even still feel like Age of Empires 2 with such a profound change? Over the last week, I put Auto Eco to the test against the AI. In this video, I'll show you how villager priority stacks up against a traditional build order. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. What the primary advantages and disadvantages are, and share my opinion on automation's place in the game. First, I wanted to get a general sense of how the automation works. What does it try to do? How does it prioritize decision making? To what extent can you really just leave it alone and autopilot your empire? For the first match, I tried to just let villager priority do its thing with minimal input from me. I fired up Auto Scout with the food and wood preset and sat back to watch the game. I tried to remember to use the site menu to construct resource buildings for the full auto magic experience. Auto Scout actually does a better job of finding resources than I thought it would. But how would my Roomba villagers use them? Villager priority won't place resource buildings, and it won't send villagers or sheep off to scout on their own. More on that later. What it does do is task villagers to collect available resources within a fairly generous search radius, possibly your entire line of sight, but I didn't precisely test that. If it can't find a resource, you'll hear the cancellation sound and get a message about it on screen. Automated villagers will herd and kill sheep, forage berries, chop trees, and mine for gold and stone. Auto villagers won't take the boar of their own volition, but you can auto lure with the site menu. It's not a particularly great lure, and without loom, the villager will die, but it does work. Deer can also be taken with the site menu, but you can only send one to each deer this way, not the 3 or 4 you would need to harvest it cleanly. In my games, they didn't take shorefish without manual intervention. A major shortcoming of automation is that there's no specific control to prioritize different types of food or have your villagers do things in a particular order. Automation will try to take all your sheep at once before transitioning gradually onto berries and then abruptly into farming. Automatic farming is an interesting one. I'm still on the fence about its usefulness. On the plus side, it can quickly place a lot of very efficient farms. It makes a perfect pinwheel every time, assuming it has the space to do so. Where this becomes problematic is that auto farmers can unexpectedly deplete your entire bank of wood in an instant. If you're trying to follow a build order, this makes it impossible to get the right buildings and upgrades at the right time, as you won't reliably have the wood for them. And if you're bad at the game like me, this compounds into forgetting to get that upgrade altogether. Another weakness is that placing so many foundations at once leaves you open to an attentive enemy sniping them. Unlike other buildings, farm foundations can be seen and destroyed immediately, leaving you with no farm and no wood. Luckily, automatic placement can be toggled off in the priorities wheel, and you can choose a default behavior for this in the settings menu. In late game, auto farm is actually pretty decent, or at least convenient. Placing 70 farms with a controller kinda sucks. It's way easier to just plop some mills and let the robot do its thing. You can use the site menu on your mill to trigger automatic placement without enabling automation. With a better idea of what villager priority actually does, I wanted to see how effective the presets would be at actually executing their namesake strategies. As it turns out, performing a typical build order with automation is a pretty frustrating experience. Presets will start trying to assign villagers to everything at the same time, not in sequence. So if you pick the food and wood preset, it won't send 6 to sheep and then 4 to wood. It'll divvy up your villagers as soon as it can. You can't just set it and forget it. If you want your villagers assigned to specific tasks, you end up babysitting the automation, which kind of defeats the purpose. When I tried setting a preset for 6 to food and 3 to wood at the start of the game, it would give me a 4-2 split, which doesn't collect enough food to keep the TC producing. Starting with an all-food preset and then adding to wood later does work, but then you have to keep reducing the wood as your population grows. Otherwise, it'll keep adding lumberjacks even when you don't need them. Microing the presets feels too much like wasted effort, knowing that a manual build would just be better. If you know what you're doing at the start of the game, it feels like the automation is fighting against you. But what about if you don't know what to do? I can see how this system would be great for casual players who just don't want to invest hours into practicing their Dark Age, or for new players trying to figure everything out for the first time. In my games, I got better results by just going with the flow and not trying to force the automation to play a certain way. So, can you actually drush with the Militia Rush preset? Traditionally, players would mine 10 gold when going for a drush, giving you just enough gold to produce the 3 militia, enough to harass the enemy or even maybe kill a villager. But in the current meta, players have shifted to a 2 militia pre-mill strategy. The Militia Rush preset doesn't actually let you do either of those. It goes to gold very early and then continues to send vills there, even after you've got enough. Drushing kind of requires clean execution to pay off. It's hard to actually do enough damage with Militia to justify what they cost, in terms of both resources and your attention. Against the moderate AI, my Drush did arrive a little bit late, but not too late to do some damage. I was able to force some idle time and even get a kill. The militia did all eventually die before I could upgrade to men-at-arms. However, I did win the game. Against hard AI, things went worse. By the time my militia made it to the enemy base, they were well into feudal age and had plenty of archers. I got wrecked and wasn't able to recover, ultimately losing the game. The militia preset feels pretty weak. I fared much better with the other presets as I was able to beat the hard AI on land and extreme on water. I gave the naval preset a go on migration and was surprised that it actually worked pretty well. It's a reasonable choice for mid to late games on land as well, but that's not to say it doesn't have disadvantages too. Just like the other settings, automated villagers will still follow sheep that you're trying to scout with for a surprising distance and kill them far from the TC. On water, this behavior is made worse by the fact that villagers will try to collect resources on other islands. This can leave you with a ton of idols, just standing on whichever shoreline was closest to whatever resource they're trying to collect. This can happen on land maps too, if a resource is blocked by walls or buildings. A positive for using auto-eco on water maps is that your island is usually pretty safe from enemy raids. Your villagers can't be automated into harm's way if harm isn't there. As landings are less common, automation fares a bit better in this regard. The best way to use villager priority is to turn it off. Just kidding. Kind of. If you do want to give auto-eco a shot, my take on the best approach would be going with a custom ratio in the Dark Age and then shifting to wooden food or the militia preset once you're up to feudal. You could of course carry on with manual ratios, but continuing to tweak them throughout the game consumes attention that would be better spent elsewhere or on just managing your eco manually. From late feudal through early imperial, you'll want to go with whatever suits your desired army composition. I found that naval was the most useful, followed by militia rush and then balanced. The best choice obviously depends on what you're trying to do, but auto-eco is not going to be perfect regardless, so there's very much a point of diminishing returns in trying to optimize it. Post-imperial is probably where automation is most viable, due to the fact that your villagers are much more efficient at this point, and losing a few doesn't really matter anyway. If you're headed for the late game trash war, the food and wood preset is an obvious choice. My best tip for playing auto-eco, aside from don't, is to pick Saracens, as you'll be heavily relying on their market bonus. So now we know pretty much how auto-eco works, but it's got a number of idiosyncrasies as well. You might think villager priority would assign freshly created villagers where they're needed while leaving your existing workers alone. That's actually not the case. Each time that a villager spawns, automation not only tasks that villager, but can rebalance your entire economy if the current assignments don't match your preset. This can happen even if you haven't changed the preset. As your population changes, adding a villager can nudge the gatherer count above or below the threshold for adjustment. This can lead to the AI needing to make a greater change than the one villager that spawns, and sometimes those extra villagers that it reassigns were doing something important like luring a boar or even building a castle. Another disadvantage that new players might not even notice happening is that villagers don't drop off their resources when auto-eco reassigns them. So if you've got a group of hunters that get reassigned with their hands full, all that food is just gone. And that can be a disaster for your early game. Deer hunters do seem to have some resistance to being rebalanced. I didn't encounter any issues when milling deer and shift queuing to take them one at a time. This is, however, not the case for sheep. Villager priority tries very, very hard to eat all your sheep as soon as it can. Deer hunters will be reassigned if you make dramatic changes, but in normal play, they seem to follow my orders more reliably than the others. But surprise, this has some problems too. The game has no qualms about forward farming around your deer mill, and will keep sending villagers there even if they're in danger and you're actively trying to pull them away. Lumber camps behave similarly in that if you move the choppers to a new woodline, the AI will continue to send villagers to long distance gather what's left by the old camps, even if there's newer and more efficient woodlines available. The only way to avoid this seems to be to just delete your old resource buildings. At times, relying on the automation caused me to make more mistakes than I usually would. The AI takes decisions that differ from how a human would play, which can feel confusing and counterintuitive. It creates a different rhythm than the normal flow of the game, which after playing for so many years is really ingrained. Combined with how automation lets you think about your economy less, using auto-eco led me to more frequently forget basics like refreshing camps, getting upgrades on time, and building houses, as the timing of those events felt a little bit less predictable. Being a robot, it of course does make the same decisions every time, but those decisions just don't line up with what I'd want to do. And I think that's a good thing. It would be bad for the game if the automation was too strong, making an easy button that could replace hours of practice. Players wouldn't learn or appreciate the game to its or their full potential if given the opportunity to win and climb the ladder without a challenge. And that wouldn't even be fun anyway. So to sum it all up, for veterans and competitive players, automation is just trash. But for casual players, villager priority absolutely has its place. Someone who's just starting out won't experience the same dissonance that I did because they won't have the same baseline expectation to compare it to. Age of Empires is a hard game, and learning how to play it takes a long time. lowering the skill floor to let more players enjoy the game that we love so much is a good thing. The fact that villager priority isn't viable for competitive play is the way it should be, especially considering that most of the game's fans don't even play ranked 1v1 to begin with. That said, the ceiling for what you can do with automation is actually higher than I expected. I was able to beat the extreme AI while using it, but to be fair, this seemed more due to the fact that the AI doesn't know how to play water maps. I lost to the hardest AI while playing Auto Eco on Arabia. I tried this a few times and was only able to get the win if I turned automation off. Considering that villager priority is aimed at newer and more casual players, hardest AI seems like a pretty reasonable breakpoint for where the inefficiencies of Auto Eco would start to make it difficult to win the game. It feels as if a player could reasonably compete at the 700 to 800 level on the cross-input ladder using Auto Eco if they otherwise have skills comparable to those players. But climbing even to 1k would likely require learning to play manually or being exceptionally good in other areas to offset the disadvantages of villager automation. So does Auto Eco ruin the game? No. But are you going to climb the ranked ladder using it? Probably also no. So what do you think about villager automation? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching!